Tonight on Primetime, 12 days into the US-Israel assault on Iran, and the conflict is widening. Major strikes overnight hit Tehran, while Washington reports naval clashes near the Strait of Hormuz. The war is widening and the stakes are rising. Good evening. Well, it is now the 12th day since the United States and Israel launched their attacks on Iran, and overnight the airstrikes on Tehran intensified again. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say they've begun the 35th wave of retaliatory operations targeting American bases across the region and sites in Israel. Meanwhile, the US military says it has destroyed Iranian naval vessels, including 16 mine layers near the Strait of Hormuz. Here's more.
The United States and Israel carried out the most intense airstrikes of the war on Tuesday, as the US destroyed several Iranian mine-laying vessels near the Strait of Hormuz, further raising tensions in the region. US President Donald Trump said on social media that American forces had destroyed 10 inactive boats suspected of laying naval mines, warning that any vessel attempting to mine the waterway would be dealt with quickly and violently. US Central Command later confirmed that a total of 16 Iranian mine-laying ships had been destroyed near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy choke points, where roughly a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments pass through. Meanwhile, a suspected Iranian drone struck a US diplomatic support facility in Baghdad on Tuesday, hitting near a guard tower at the Baghdad Diplomatic Support Center close to the airport. Officials have not confirmed casualties, but the incident highlights growing threats to US personnel in the region. The developments come as Iran launched what it described as its most intense wave of strikes since the conflict began. Iranian state media said missiles targeted Israeli territory and US assets across the Middle East. Sirens sounded in parts of Israel, while Saudi Arabia said it intercepted several ballistic missiles and drones heading toward military and energy sites. Washington says the objectives of the operation are to destroy Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, weaken its regional proxy forces, and ensure Tehran never obtains a nuclear weapon.
Well, to help us understand the political thinking behind these events, I'm joined now by Scott Lucas, a political analyst and professor of US and international relations. Scott, always very good to see you. Good to see you back on Primetime. Let's kind of step back a bit now and look at this. The US mission seems to have changed somewhat over time, or at least the emphasis has at least changed a little bit. So-called regime change now looks pretty unlikely. So what's your understanding of what the mission is now?
Well, actually, I think there was a difference between the Israeli approach, which was for regime change. They didn't want anyone connected with the Islamic Republic to stay in place, versus an American approach, which is more regime accommodation or regime surrender. The Trump folks, I think, did have a couple of goals. They wanted Iran to completely give up its civilian nuclear program permanently. They wanted Iran to put ballistic missiles on the table, to be cut, limited in size and in range, and they wanted Iran to loosen and even halt its alliances with groups like Lebanon's Hezbollah, Yemen's Houthis, the militias in Iraq. In the last set of talks before the war started, 2 days before the war started, the Iranians and the Omani mediators thought they were making progress, but Iran had said, we will not get rid of our nuclear program entirely, and we're not going to discuss ballistic missiles. And that's why the Trump folks decided to go in with the Israelis, to make Iran give way on those conditions. The problem is that the Trump folks had a plan A for doing this alongside Israel, which was you kill the supreme leader, you kill dozens of officials, and then the regime's going to surrender and give you what you want. But when the regime didn't surrender and retaliated, the Americans don't have a plan B. All they can do, and you've talked about this just now, all they in Israel can do is just like step up the strikes, the most intense of the war so far, and hope that somehow they can change the regime's mind when there's no sign that that's going to happen in the near future.
And Scott, when you look at the past 12 days, where are we, do you think, in terms of the trajectory? I mean, have things peaked, or do you think the sort of bigger conflict yet to come?
Oh, God, there's no way I'm going to say it's peaked. I mean, as I speak to you, we have had the further U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran today, but we also have had the Iranian retaliation. They have tried to hit Gulf states primarily with drones, but drones can still do a great deal of damage. And of course, you'll be reporting that the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Only a couple of Greek tankers have been able to make it through in the last couple of days. And if the straits are closed, you know what the shocks will be on oil, on gas, and on the global economy. The problem here is that, okay, who's going to make the Israelis stop? Well, that would have to be the Americans. No one else has the leverage to do it right now. Who's going to make the regime surrender? Well, no one right now. Who's going to make the Americans step back and pull the Israelis back? Possibly the Gulf states, and they have been trying to mediate this, but they can't get the Trump folks to listen yet. You're going to need to see a buildup of domestic pressure in the United States, especially with the economic consequences that Donald Trump pays attention to, and then the door might open for Gulf state mediation, especially through Qatar.
And Scott, is there any sense that that domestic pressure is yet starting to build up? I mean, I got a sense that near the start, certainly the first few days of the war, that President Trump felt like he was pretty much unscathed by sort of negative polling or reaction from the public when it came to the war. Where is the public now, and also where is Congress now? Are there any signs that cracks are starting to appear?
Well, Trump wobbled on Monday, Guy. I think a lot of the media reported his, the war is, complete or near complete as like a sign. He's saying, oh, we've almost won. That, I think they missed what happened there. I think the combination of the surge in oil prices, which had started at $118 per barrel, almost double what they were at the start of the war, the declining stock markets, and the adverse opinion polls. Almost 60% of Americans do not favor these military operations, including about 20 to 25% of Republicans. They shook Trump. Now, he's back to blustering right now, and I'm going to try to ride this out. But the reality here is that if you get another shock in the oil markets, something that may hold off for a bit because of the decision to release strategic reserves, if you get another shock in the oil market, it will affect prices in the United States. And Americans are very sensitive, especially to gasoline prices. And that's when I think Trump will wobble further, because Republicans in Congress will be wobbling further.
And do you think he'll be anticipating that happening now, Scott, and coming up potentially with a plan to extract the US, but sort of make it appear like this is a tremendous victory and was part of the plan all along?
Oh, he'll try to bluster his way through it. I mean, he'll probably try to declare that Iran's nuclear sites have been obliterated again, the same thing they said last June. He'll probably point to the killing of the supreme leader. We got rid of a bad guy, ignoring the fact, of course, that the supreme leader has been replaced. He'll probably say, look at all these places we damaged. But the fundamentals here is that, the Americans have not achieved the goals that I described to you. They have not gotten Iran to give up its nuclear program entirely. Iran still has ballistic missiles. Iran still will pursue its alliances in the Middle East. But here's the overall thing, Guy. There's a big report in the New York Times today I recommend, which is the Trump folks weren't prepared for what happened on day one of this war. They went in firing, blazing guns alongside the Israelis, and they weren't prepared when the regime didn't fall. So if they weren't prepared then for what's happening, why should I think they're prepared now to try to get themselves out of what is effectively a cul-de-sac for their aims?
It's astonishing, isn't it? Because this has happened so many times before, hasn't it? The foreign war that isn't thought through in terms of contingency planning. And then there's a big inquiry afterwards, and we all agree that we should really have thought it through and come up with more contingencies. And it sort of just seems to keep happening. How long do you think that President Trump, the US, can ride this out, as you put it? Is there a sort of a time limit before this becomes quite clearly the sort of thing that he had campaigned against getting involved in before he was elected?
I can't put a time on it, Guy, but I can tell you what the indicators will be. And that is, as I mentioned, if you get the price shocks in the United States, and it looks like those will be lasting, because the U.S. already has inflation ticking up. Because the Trump folks campaigned on lowering inflation, and they will be seen not to have delivered, because the stock markets will take a hit, because the Trump folks will be seen not to be delivering on their domestic agenda, even some of their supporters will say, wait a minute, we supported you because we wanted to make the economy better. We wanted to do something about immigration. And now, contrary to your promise not to get involved in foreign interventions, you're occupied thousands of miles away. When that happens, well, let me just turn it over to Susie Wiles, the chief of staff. A few days ago in the White House, she convened the Trump folks and said, give me something to lower gasoline prices. And officials within the Trump administration said, we were close to panic. That tells you how and why this U.S. intervention might end. It just doesn't tell you when.
Yeah, it's very tricky, because one would assume that he needs some kind of good news in order to sort of use that as a platform to extract themselves. It can't just be a succession of bad news. So very, very tricky indeed. What do you think then is the risk of this turning into a protracted, never-ending sort of conflict?
Well, it's already an uncontained conflict, Guy. I mean, your folks are going to be feeling it all the way around. You folks have felt it in Azerbaijan when you actually had some drones that flew into your territory. We've seen the Gulf states face a series of attacks that they haven't faced in decades. We've seen its war on Lebanon to expand its occupation there. We have seen almost an unraveling of the effort to try to limit Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we're already there with an uncontained war. Again, in terms of how long that can last, I can't predict that. What I can tell you here is that de-escalation is the priority. The Iranian regime, terrible repressive regime, got blood on its hands. The Trump folks, they got way more than blood on their hands, and so do the Israelis. But you need to just have everybody step back, stop talking about regime change, and start talking about a way that you get a ceasefire sooner rather than later.
Professor Scott Lucas, always good to speak to you. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, to look at the regional implications of this conflict, I'm joined now by Stacey Bivens. She's a US political analyst based in Chicago. Now, she's previously worked in the region and has closely followed its political dynamics. Stacey, very good indeed to have you with us. Thanks for joining us on PrimeTime. As I just said, you've worked in this region before. You know it. You know how sensitive the balance can be. As things seem to continuously intensify, Stacey, what's your observation of the countries around Iran and how they're reacting at this moment?
Well, right now they're reacting in panic and in a self-preservation mode. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, they've all cut production because they're not able to move their oil production to market through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a disruption of oil that the globe hasn't seen in nearly 50 years. And so in response to that, we're seeing this energy austerity moving across Asia and Europe. Thailand, the Philippines, and Pakistan have shifted to 4-day work weeks, and they're mandating that when you can work from home or remotely that you do so, all in an effort to save fuel. And it's not just about physical. It's not just about saving fuel. It's also about physical safety with debris from drones and from missiles hitting civilian areas. This isn't just about saving fuel. It's surviving a conflict where the borders seem to be becoming very flexible now, and there's no dedicated end. We just don't know when it's going to end.
And Stacey, when you look at the countries in the region, particularly, let's look at the Gulf states. There has been commentary right from day one in this war, hasn't there, about whether or not any of them will be drawn into direct conflict. So far, they've managed to resist that. How are governments feeling in those states at the moment? Do you think to some degree the risk of being drawn into direct conflict has passed, or is it still very much present?
No, I think that this is still very much present. We don't know how much longer there's going to be. We don't know if the United States is going to go ahead and put boots on the ground. This is a very disconcerting event that's happening. And from the very beginning of this conflict, Iran sent a very clear message that if we go down, the region goes down, and nobody wants that. And so these countries are in a very precarious position. The leadership's walking a fine line. You have the U.S. bases there, and they've had it for a while, and it's never been a major issue before. So you don't want to antagonize the United States and President Donald Trump by saying we don't want you using these anymore, and at the same time they don't want to alienate and anger Iran by seeming like they are the United States. And so there is this effort to try to be neutral and just try to hope that this thing passes soon.
Yeah, it's a very good point you make, Stacey. And on that kind of self-restraint, many people, including many of our viewers, we see comments on social media, are asking the question, why don't the Gulf states fight back? These are tremendously prosperous, advanced societies. What would be your explanation for that?
Look, in my mind, this is a survival tactic. As I said, nobody really wanted to go to war. No matter how leadership in these countries felt about Iranian leadership, they won't want a direct counterstrike on Iran that could trigger a total war, that could ruin its own infrastructure, that could kill most or all of its citizens. They really just hope that this remains contained or more contained, and that whatever fighting goes on with the United States and Israel and Iran just stays more centralized, that they all do the heavy lifting, and that they bring it to a conclusion.
Many of these countries, of course, have got US air bases, US troops are there. That's been a particular bone of contention with Iran, of course. What on earth do they do now? It's so difficult for these governments, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you risk annoying the US. On the other, you risk annoying Iran. How on earth do they navigate through this?
It's just a very tough situation. And I don't have the answer, and I'm not sure that they have the answer. I think they're just feeling in the dark and trying their very best not to antagonize either side and to just get out in front of it with minimal damage.
Okay, Stacey, really great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Chicago. We appreciate it very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the rising security concerns in northern Iraq, where recent drone and missile incidents around Erbil are raising tensions across the Kurdistan region. Do stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Gökdeniz atışı hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
A very warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Well, over the past few days, northern Iraq, particularly the city of Erbil, has witnessed a number of drone and missile incidents linked to rising regional tensions, raising fresh concerns about security across the Kurdistan region. A News' Ollie Barrett is there and in the last few minutes has sent us this report.
Well, Guy, in many ways, life here is continuing as normal, but there is the constant threat and fear of strikes on this region, and we're seeing that play out every single day. And what I mean by that is the assessment of local media here is that we are now past our 11th consecutive night in which strikes in the form of drones or missiles have been fired towards the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. Overnight last night we saw what appears to have been a drone fired towards the US coalition forces base, which is next to Erbil International Airport on the outskirts of the city here. Over the last 10-11 days or so, local media believe that 4 people have died in strikes which have been sent into the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, and around 19 people have been injured. Now, some, if not many, of the strikes aimed at this part of the country seem to have been coming from Iran-backed militia groups that are actually inside of Iraq's borders, and that is something that politicians here in the Kurdistan region have been calling on the Prime Minister in Baghdad to try and get on top of as quickly as possible, or they say, some of them, they will potentially take measures into their own hands. So there are all sorts of ways in which this situation is incredibly complicated and complex and could unfold in all sorts of different directions. Of course, in the early days of the American military action inside Iran, or the airstrikes that began on Iran, we started to hear from American sources and from Israeli sources this idea that they would be supportive of Kurdish forces taking military action, a military operation of some sort inside Iran, which could potentially destabilize the Iranian government. Now, there are certainly some Kurdish forces who believe that that moment may well come, and may well come fairly soon, and that they are ready if and when it does come. There are also Kurdish politicians in this part of the country who are very clear that they don't want a wider escalation of this conflict, and we've been hearing from the Kurdistan regional government here in Erbil that they don't want Kurdistan to be a launching off pad for cross-border incursions into Iran. So, as I say, deeply complex here in all sorts of ways in which this could play out. There's the economic element to it as well. The airport is currently shut. That has an impact. Iraq is finding it more and more difficult to get its oil into international markets in the way that it would normally like to do so, in the quantities it would normally like to do so. One example of a potential mitigation of that is that here in the Kurdistan region, it's understood that there are considerations underway about potentially boosting the amount of oil that is sent through a key pipeline to Ceyhan in Turkey as a way of mitigating some of the restrictions on supply routes that we're seeing as a result of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. So all sorts of ways in which this conflict, this crisis is affecting the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. And as I say, all sorts of unpredictability, Guy, about exactly how it may play out in the days, if not weeks and months ahead.
Well, joining us now also from Erbil in northern Iraq is Binar FK. He's an analyst and commentator, plus an associate fellow at the Centre for International Security and Economic Strategy. Binar, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's get started with the basics then. How often have these drone or missile incidents actually have been happening?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. So over the past 11 days, the Kurdistan region of Iraq has experienced repeated drone and missile attacks, and sometimes on consecutive nights. So explosives and interceptions have become a regular occurrence, particularly around airport area, the diplomatic institutions and establishments, attacks on the American bases, and also attacks on Kurdistan region Peshmerga forces. So as of today, and according to the local statistics, the region has subjected to around more than 250 drone and missiles attacks since the outbreak of this confrontation, although most were intercepted by the defense system that has been based in the international airport. So the authorities in Kurdistan region say that the majority of these attacks shut down, but the debris has still caused casualties and damages in some cases and in some areas. For example, the attacks resulted in the deaths of 5 people, including 4 Peshmerga fighters from 2 Iranian opposition Kurdish parties, and also 1 security member of Erbil International Airport. But also in the attacks, still 23 people were injured, including security personnel, civilians, and also fighters from Iranian Kurdish opposition groups. So the situation is quite fragile, and the attacks are.
And Binar, that is those in charge have been laying out the facts. But who do officials believe might be behind these attacks? And is there any evidence that they're pointing to?
Yeah, so these attacks is not new. It has been occurring even before these confrontations. These attacks has been continuing for years. So the officials in Kurdistan region and the security apparatus point primarily to the Iranian-backed armed groups that are based in Iraq, that are located in Iraq, as well as the direct Iranian retaliations linked to the wider regional conflict that has been happening for 11 days. So several attacks have been claimed by the groups associated with the Islamic resistance groups in Iraq, which is an umbrella network of the Iranian-backed armed groups that they are saying they are targeting U.S. assets in the region. So the Kurdistan regional government has repeatedly said that these attacks launched from the areas that are outside of their jurisdictions and outside of their control. So they call on the Iraqi government to take necessary actions in order to find a solution for these attacks.
Yeah, and in terms of those solutions, I mean, Erbil, as you say, hosts some very sensitive locations, including the US consulate and coalition forces at the airport. Those elements seem to be part of why the city is being targeted. But what on earth do those in charge do? It's a very difficult situation for them, isn't it?
Yeah, so the airport hosts the US-led international coalition and also the nearby facilities that support the military operation against ISIS. At the same time, Erbil is the home of the largest US diplomatic consulate in the world, which is opened recently, and it represents a major American diplomatic presence in Iraq. So because of these confrontations, the US military and diplomatic assets and armored groups aligned with Iran see Erbil as a strategic position, as a strategic target when tension with Washington arise each time. So these attacks are really not new and happening for years. So even though Erbil generally is considered as one of the safest city and one of the most stable city in Iraq, but its strategic importance that makes it a symbolic and operational target for these regional confrontations.
And Binar, from the Kurdistan regional government's perspective, how are local authorities actually responding to these incidents, both in terms of security on the ground, but also coordination back with Baghdad?
Yeah. So the Kurdistan regional government has taken a dual approach. One is the security measures, and the other is political pressure on Baghdad. So on the security side, the Kurdish counter-terrorism forces and also the coalition air defense system here have been intercepting most of the incoming drone and missile attacks, and the authorities have also increased security around the diplomatic establishments and missions of international community, but also military installations. But politically also, the KRG has been constantly condemning the attacks, and they are calling on the Iraqi federal government to prevent these armed groups operating outside of the state, outside of the control of the state, of the states that they are attacking. They are preparing these attacks. So there has been an ongoing cooperation between the leadership of the KRG and also the central government. And the Kurdish officials argue that the attacks often originate from the territory under the federal government, or in this case, under militia control, which makes the prevention quite difficult at the time being.
And then looking at the bigger picture from where you are, from what you can see, how worried are officials and also residents that northern Iraq could somehow become more deeply caught up in this wider confrontation?
Yeah, so the situation is very fragile. There is a growing concern that the Kurdistan region, but also Iraq, become entangled in this broader regional conflict, in this broader regional confrontations. So the current wave of the attacks is widely seen as a part of larger regional escalations between Iran and the United States and their allies, with Iraq becoming one of the arenas of the proxy forces to operate. So officials here worry that if the conflict continues to intensify, Erbil, but also other parts of Iraq and Kurdistan region remain a front line for the attacks on US military assets. At the same time, the residents are trying to continue their daily life, but the repeated attacks and the drone interceptions have created a sense of anxiousness, a sense of uncertainty and concern that the region could be drawn deeper into this conflict. So for now, authorities say that most of the drones are being intercepted, but the frequency of the attacks shows how wide the regional war is increasingly being felt throughout Iraq and in Kurdistan region.
Binar, we appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you for joining us on Primetime tonight.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, to understand how this conflict is being viewed from Tehran's perspective now, I'm joined by Ahmad Hashemi, Director of the Middle East and Central Asia Programme at the Global Policy Institute based in Washington. And he's also a former Iranian Foreign Ministry official. Ahmad, very good indeed to see you. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. As I've just said, you've worked inside Iran's diplomatic system, so you understand how decisions are made. What does Tehran believe that Washington is ultimately trying to achieve?
So Tehran's understanding is that Washington thought this will be a short and quick victory, Venezuela-type victory, and even the timing of the starting of the war was symbolic, was significant. And the understanding in Washington was that they will start a very quick, very decisive war, aerial bombardment, and the killing of the supreme leader, and the Venezuela moment happens, and in the Monday morning, without any consequences, without any serious consequences for the global trade, shipping, and global markets. This great achievement will be announced in the U.S. media by President Trump. This was the understanding when President Trump started this war, this conflict.
Now, of course, a lot has changed over the last 12 days. There is a new supreme leader in Iran. He appears to be have strong support. At least we've seen people on the streets being very supportive of him. What do you think the strategic message is now in Tehran, particularly in terms of recent attacks? Has anything changed? If so, what is the refreshed message that it is looking to send out to the world?
So Iran is pursuing a high risk strategy designed to impose maximum economic pain and instability in the region. And this approach aims to create enough disruption, including in targeting shipping infrastructure and threatening global trade and global shipping and global tourism, global aviation, to force a halt to the military actions, the Israeli and U.S. military actions. This is the goal. However, Iran currently escalates to de-escalate. Is not in a hurry. Is not in a rush. We witnessed that yesterday Ali Larijani, a top Iranian security official, made a statement on Twitter or on X, stating that the strategic oil shipping lanes will either be this Strait of Hormuz will either be a strait of peace and prosperity for all, or it will be a strait of defeat and surrendering for the warmongers. So this language, this tone of this language shows that Iran has adopted an all or no one stance when it comes to the conflict or to the peace and stability in the region. This is a zero-sum game that the Iranian regime is pursuing, hoping that the Western or rather the U.S. and Israel will back off. And even it was significant when he posted this tweet in multiple languages: English, Chinese, Arabic, Farsi, French, Russian. So the messaging is that this is a global, this is a escalation with a global significance for a vital transit route where nearly a fifth of global energy passes through. So you either come to the table and agree with Iran's understanding of a future ceasefire, or this will be consequential for global trade, shipping, and stability.
And from that global outlook, let's just shift internally now and take a look at things inside the country. You've written extensively about internal politics within Iran. As you see things now, how strong, how unified is this current government?
As the war goes on, we see this rally around the flag effect, and I see that there are some stances by the U.S. or by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where they ask the Iranian people to rise up and pour to the streets and oppose this regime. And quite interestingly, I find it very ludicrous, very preposterous.
Well, they're on the
While
streets.
there's
They're on the streets, Ahmed. They're just, but they're advocating for the government. That's that's the only problem, as far as America would be concerned.
Exactly. So it will take some time for us to witness the rally around the flag effect to wither. For the time being, we will see a nation unified against the foreign invasion, against the air bombardment. When we see a lot of attacks on even infrastructure, on civilian structures, including the schools, mosques, and some other hospitals and other infrastructures. So this is not the time for the Iranian people, from the regime's perspective and as well as from the public's view. This is not a time to talk about grievances. This is not a time to topple the regime. This is a time to unite against even some see this as an indiscriminate targeting of infrastructure and civilian centers. So right now we are not going to expect any sort of dissent and any protest movement in the streets.
No, it's very interesting. So in a sense, what you're saying is that whole conversation has become redundant. The US claim that the people are just waiting to rise up against the so-called regime. The Iranians would say that no, the people are entirely loyal. But actually, it seems like that conversation isn't really going to go anywhere for anytime soon.
That's correct. So the majority of people in Iran, the majority of Iranian public in the country and in diaspora oppose this conflict, oppose this war. They don't think that is the way out. The majority of Iranians are against the regime, are against the policies the regime has implemented internally and in the region and globally. But they don't think carpet bombing, they don't think air bombardment is the answer to that. So with the exception of monarchists, which is a fringe group abroad, they are very loud, very vociferous, but they do not represent people. They do not have enough backing and following inside the country. With the exception of monarchists who cheer, who are happy and who dance in the streets of the Western capitals and celebrate this air bombardments. The majority of people are, at least for the time being, are united against a foreign aggression. But the moment the foreign strikes, the air strikes stop, then we can wait for a couple months to see signs of dissent, signs of protest, because the underlying issues are there, and they're, if anything, they have been exacerbated. So there is every reason for people to protest, but now is not the right time.
And in terms of the next steps, the strategic options that Tehran is looking at, that it might consider, I mean, you've already mentioned that there's a sense in which Tehran is prepared to damage the regional economy, damage confidence. We've seen that particularly recently with oil prices and shipping issues. That's what it's prepared to do, but what does it want to do? What would be its ideal scenario now over the next few weeks?
So the ideal scenario for the regime from Iranian perspective would be inflicting enough pain on U.S. Maybe U.S. is out of the U.S. is out of reach, but its allies, especially the Arab Gulf allies of the United States. Those are the soft belly or weak spots of this, from Iranian perspective, this anti-Iranian alliance, this pro-American alliance. So again, Israel is a little bit out of reach as well. But the easiest thing that the Iranian regime can do is target this the success story that is called Dubai or some other capitals in the Gulf region. But however, I would add that if this war is prolonged, if Iran sees that it is this is going to be a war of survival. We are not there yet. We are not in a phase of a regime collapse or a decisive defeat situation. But if we are there, I believe Iran, the Iranian regime we would look at we should keep an eye on three major developments, three potential developments, three major leverages that the Iranian regime has that it would deploy in coming days and weeks if this is prolonged, this war. Number one, the mining of the Strait of Hormuz. It remains a primary threat, assuming that they haven't already started partially mining this as a part of a covert operation. Number two, there is another front that Iran can potentially open in the current conflict. It has been untapped. Iran hasn't leveraged that, and that is the Gulf of Aden. Destabilizing the Gulf of Aden as its second or Bab el-Mandeb rather, as a second choke point, very important maritime choke point in addition to Strait of Hormuz. And we will see the Houthi pressure on global shipping. And number three, this is outrageous, but because of my previous experience with the government, as you rightly mentioned, I was aware of their mass production of chemical weapons. This is as a last-ditch effort by the Iranian regime. They have produced mass weapons of the mass-produced weapons of mass destruction, especially as far as I am aware, the case of chemical weapons. They haven't. There's no signs that they have used them either against their own people, because the Iranian regime they are in war with their own people. They are in war with the region, with the Arab Gulf nations, and with the U.S. and Israel. So that is a last-ditch effort for the regime. If push comes to the shove, we would see that. Very scary scenario as well. The use of chemical weapons against Dubai, against some Arab capitals, as well as potentially Israel, as well as maybe if we see a breakaway region in Iran, the Kurdish region, if we see an uprising, that would be again an option that the Iranian regime would consider.
Well, let's all hope that we never see that option come to fruition. Ahmed, we thank you very much indeed for your considered analysis. We appreciate it very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the latest business news stories shaping the week with Katie Wilson. Do stay tuned.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Before partition, Pakistanis were singled out, attacked, and forced from their homes.
More than 200,000 Muslims were eliminated through massacres, through displacement.
In all Indian states, the communities are being oppressed, and the Indian Army is committing atrocities against them.
I left Indian-occupied Kashmir and came to Azad Kashmir on foot.
We cannot even go to the graves of our loved ones. We cannot even pray for them.
What is the fault of the Kashmiri people?
Kashmir is the place where partition never ended.
The region of Kashmir is between 3 nuclear powers.
If a nuclear war breaks out here, not only the South Asia, but the entire world will be affected.
If India believes that people of Jammu and Kashmir are with them, let them go for their referendum tomorrow.
For a Kashmiri, what matters the most is Azadi, is the right of self-determination. Azadi from Indian hegemony.
Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us. And now Katie Wilson is here with the very latest business news. Katie, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, we'll have the latest fallout from the war in the Middle East. That's from the oil industry and from the aviation industry. And we'll also be having a look at the Wealth of Nations, which is marking its 250th anniversary. Let's get started. We begin tonight with Africa's largest oil refinery, where the impact of the US-Israeli war with Iran is already being felt. The Dangote refinery in Nigeria says the cost of shipping crude from local terminals has surged more than fourfold in just a week, as the conflict in the Middle East drives oil prices and freight rates sharply higher.
The US-Israeli war in Iran is causing costs to spiral here, Africa's largest oil refinery. That's according to David Bird, managing director of the Dangote refinery in Nigeria's Lagos, on Monday.
You could go back a week and it was hovering in a stable range of the mid-60s. It's now 118. If you look at freight rates, it would cost us about $800,000 a day to bring crude on a tanker from a Nigerian terminal to our refinery. That's currently 3.5 million. 800,000 to 3.5 million. Incredible escalation in the freight rates.
The Middle East conflict has stoked fears of major disruptions to global supplies. On Monday, that sent oil prices past $100 a barrel, to their highest level since mid-2022.
There are countries right now, developed and developing, without a domestic refining industry, that are already rationing. They are already seeing panic buying. And heaven knows what will happen over the next 10 days, 2 weeks, as some of those countries with low supply security stocks start to endure significant shortages, because where are the molecules going to come from?
Bird said the Dangote refinery was operating at its full capacity of 650,000 barrels a day and would continue operating as long as it maintains access to Nigerian crude at international benchmark prices.
Well, sticking with the war in the Middle East, the fallout is also shaking the aviation industry. Airline stocks tumbled and airfares surged this week as oil prices jumped to their highest level in years. The spike in fuel costs and tighter airspace are raising fears of a travel slowdown and possible flight disruptions.
Airfares soared on Monday as the US-Israeli war with Iran sent oil prices surging. And airline stocks took a battering too, as fears of a deep travel slump and the potential for the widespread grounding of planes. Oil prices were trading more than 15% higher, at levels not seen since 2022. That piles pressure on carriers, already navigating tight airspace, as travellers scramble to evade the Middle East. In Asia, airlines bearing the brunt of investor fears included Korean Airlines, which tumbled 8.6%, and Air New Zealand, which lost 7.8%. Underscoring that pain on the consumer side were jumps in ticket prices. Direct flights from Seoul to London on March the 11th with Korean Airlines leapt to $4,359. That's up from $564 7 days earlier, according to Google Flights data. Analysts say the impact of high airfares could limit travel demand for much of the year. Fuel is the second largest expense for air carriers after labour. It typically accounts for a fifth to a quarter of operating expenses. Some major Asian and European airlines have oil hedging in place, but US airlines largely stopped the practice over the last 2 decades. Data shows that since February the 28th, more than 37,000 flights to and from the Middle East have been cancelled. With airspace severely constrained, airlines have been forced to reroute flights, carry extra fuel, or make additional refueling stops.
Now, remember the chaos late last year when thousands of Indigo passengers were left stranded after mass flight cancellations? The airline now says its chief executive has stepped down with immediate effect, months after the crisis drew scrutiny from both the public and regulators.
Indian airline Indigo said on Tuesday that CEO Peter Elbers had resigned from his position with immediate effect for personal reasons. It comes months after mass flight cancellations left tens of thousands of passengers stranded and drew regulatory scrutiny. The airline said its managing director, Rahul Bhatia, would run the company until a replacement is hired. Bhatia's Interglobe Enterprises is the largest shareholder in Indigo operator Interglobe Aviation. It held a 35.6% stake as of December. India's largest airline scrapped around 4,500 flights in the first weeks of December. It highlighted concerns over limited competition in the world's fastest growing aviation market. The airline apologised to customers after it failed to make roster changes in time to comply with stricter pilot fatigue rules set by the government.
From travel to tech now, and Elon Musk's SpaceX is reportedly leaning towards a blockbuster NASDAQ listing, potentially the largest in history. Sources say the rocket and satellite company is eyeing early inclusion in the NASDAQ 100, even as the New York Stock Exchange vies for the listing.
Elon Musk's rocket and satellite maker SpaceX is reportedly leaning toward listing its shares on the Nasdaq in what could rank as the biggest initial public offering of all time. That's according to 4 people familiar with the company's thinking. 2 of the sources said SpaceX wants early inclusion of the Nasdaq 100 index as a condition for listing on the exchange. Reuters has previously reported that SpaceX is planning an IPO as early as June. Multiple sources said the New York Stock Exchange is also competing for the listing, and neither exchange has been informed of any decision either way. The Nasdaq 100, owned by Nasdaq Inc., is seen as a premier blue-chip index by large institutional investors and serves as a barometer for the health of most of the world's biggest publicly traded names. These include mega-cap technology stocks like Nvidia, Apple and Amazon.com. The Nasdaq 100 gained about 21% last year and is slightly lower so far this year. Nasdaq proposed a new rule last month that could potentially speed up the addition of newly listed mega-cap companies to the Nasdaq 100 index, but the change could take several months to take effect.
In retail news, Zara's owner has kicked off the year on a strong note. Currency-adjusted sales rose 9% in the first quarter, showing resilience even as Middle East tensions and soaring oil prices put pressure on global consumers. Analysts say the results are solid and the company's shares jumped early in trading.
Zara owner Inditex reported on Wednesday a strong start to its first quarter. Currency-adjusted sales were up 9%, demonstrating the fast fashion company's resilience despite fragile demand in key markets. The result is likely to show investors that Inditex can sustain solid growth. That's despite European and US consumers facing further pressure from a surge in oil and gas prices, triggered by the conflict in the Middle East. Analysts at JP Morgan said in a note that the results were solid and reassuring. Inditex said some of the group's stores in the Middle East had closed temporarily due to the conflict, impacting sales slightly. Analysts estimate the region accounts for 4 to 5% of Inditex's sales. Its shares jumped 5% in early trading before paring gains. Sales in the November to January quarter, including the key Black Friday and Christmas shopping periods, rose to $13.6 billion. The pace of Inditex's sales growth has cooled since a post-pandemic boom, but its profitability has risen as it's improved stores and logistics to get new clothes to shoppers faster.
And finally, we're rounding off today's business news with a special report from Glasgow, where Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations celebrates its 250th anniversary. Written long before Donald Trump or tech billionaires, Smith's ideas on trade, wealth and markets continue to spark debate in today's global economy.
Tax the rich, trash the tariffs, end monopolies. Concepts that echo Adam Smith, whose book The Wealth of Nations turns 250 this month. Published in 1776, the year of the US Declaration of Independence, and 13 years before the French Revolution, Smith took aim at trade protectionism and extreme wealth. Many see parallels with today's tariff battles, including those linked to US President Donald Trump. Eamon Butler is director of the free market policy think tank, the Adam Smith Institute.
The Trump argument, I think, is that, America is being swindled because people are manipulating their exchange rate. China, for example, is manipulating the exchange rate, and therefore they're getting an unfair advantage in trade, and therefore we should have tariffs to offset that. And Smith did understand those arguments, but he thought that these things really should be as temporary as possible.
While Smith is most often cited for his free markets and free trade approach, when it comes to distribution of wealth, some say he could almost be channeling leftist US lawmakers like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. His metaphor, invisible hand, is often read as markets channeling self-interest for the common good, though Smith used the phrase only once and within broader moral arguments. US economist Joseph Stiglitz is a professor at Columbia University and Nobel Prize laureate.
One of the things I find so interesting is the attempt of the right to misappropriate his ideas for themselves, which I think speaks to the fact that they don't have a coherent set of philosophy. So modern economics is based on infinitely selfish people, and clearly Adam Smith didn't believe that.
Smith also suggested limited tariffs when trade terms were unfair or for security reasons.
I think he'd be disappointed in the way that trade is going at the moment, with all of the protectionism around. But he would understand it because some of it is motivated by security issues, and that was also true in his day. And he said, well, there may be some justification for that, but you really have to watch it, I think was his line.
Events marking the 250th anniversary run this year in Glasgow, Edinburgh, London, and Smith's Scottish coastal birthplace.
250 years. That's your business news roundup for the day. Back to you, Guy.
Katie, I'm not quite 250 years old, but I am a bit of an Adam Smith geek. Having been an economics student a million years ago. Something that's very interesting is he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he wrote before this obviously world famous book, and I'd really recommend it both to you and to our viewers because it really helps understand not just the wealth of nations but also some of what's going on with Trumpian politics today.
Still relevant today then.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at talks in Baku where European Council President Antonio Costa met President Ilham Aliyev to discuss energy cooperation, regional connectivity and stability. Do stay with us.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Yaptığınız atışa hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. European Council President Antonio Costa is in Baku for high-level talks with President Ilham Aliyev, where energy, cooperation, regional security and the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process are high on the agenda. Now, the two leaders have just spoken to the media following their meeting. A News' Orkan Amashov reports.
Right, today, President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, is paying an official visit to Azerbaijan. Just a couple of minutes ago, in this very room, in the background there, two leaders, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan and Antonio Costa, EU President, delivered their remarks to the media. Very interesting moments have been reflected upon, of course. Well, EU is Azerbaijan's largest trading partner and the greatest market for Azerbaijani gas exports. One of the key moments there, apart from energy, which is a central element, together with security, as long as this particular meeting is concerned, is that Antonio Costa specifically made it very clear that the EU, as an institution, stands together with Azerbaijan in the light of the current challenging situation involving Iran. He particularly condemned the latest attack on Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan airport and effectively said that Azerbaijan is being supported by EU collectively.
Azerbaijan's regional role is more important than ever. I want to recognize the challenges you face in view of the dangerous military escalation in Iran and the Middle East that has also reached you. Let me express once again, in the name of the European Union, my full solidarity with Azerbaijan and its people. We condemn in strongest terms the recent attack by Iran on Nakhchivan airport. It is essential to safeguard regional security and stability in full respect of the principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. The European Union remains committed to working with all partners through dialogue and diplomacy to de-escalate tensions and protect civilians.
And also, he made very clear that President Aliyev is expected to visit Brussels next month as well. Well, of course, energy is an important part of the bilateral interaction between Brussels and Azerbaijan. Well, half of Azerbaijan's natural gas supplies, actual exports, go to European Union markets. 12.4 BCM is believed to be the current figure, and the intention is to increase this figure to 20 BCM in the coming years, actually probably 25 BCM as well. According to the Memorandum of Understanding signed between Azerbaijan and European Union back in summer 2022, the intention was to double natural gas supplies to 20 BCM. That was a figure mentioned a couple of years ago. Of course, security is playing an important role as well. Regarding energy, President Aliyev specifically emphasized the fact that now 10 EU countries are receiving Azerbaijan's natural gas, and of course, naturally, we know that Germany and Austria are the last two countries that added to the list. And on the whole, about 16 European countries.
Today, 10 members of European Union receive gas from Azerbaijan, and the total number of countries is 16. And by this number, we are number one in the world supplying gas by pipelines. 16 countries today are receiving Azerbaijani gas, so our role in the energy security for many countries is growing. European market for us makes half of our total gas export with the potential to grow. just in the beginning of this month, we held annual meeting of the Southern Gas Corridor Advisory Council, the event which is co-hosted by Azerbaijan and European Commission. And in my remarks there, I informed the audience that we are planning to increase gas production this year. We'll start producing gas from the new field.
There was a particular focus on the bilateral peace process involving Azerbaijan and Armenia. As we know, back in August 2025, these two countries signed a joint declaration, initialed the peace agreement, and there was a particular emphasis on the intensification of this bilateral interaction. Both leaders have been, of course, naturally praised. And President Aliyev specifically said that, well, since 1991, Azerbaijan has been an independent sovereign state, but only for the past 7 months, this country, together with Armenia, have been living in peace. Well, of course, backdrop against which this meeting is taking place is incredibly important. Well, first time, according to European official accounts, the announcement regarding this meeting was made actually on the 6th of March, one day after Nakhchivan airstrike. Well, of course, naturally, there has been no indication of official connection between those two developments, whether development number one, Azerbaijan being attacked by Iran, and this particular meeting taking place today. But as I mentioned earlier during one of my previous deliveries, nothing is coincidental in international politics. Orkun Amashov, Elbrus Musayev, A-News, Baku, Azerbaijan.
Well, joining me now in the studio is the man himself, A-News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkun Amashov. Now, Orkun, you must be pretty tired. You filed that report within seconds of the meeting happening.
Yes, indeed.
You've now arrived at the studio within minutes of filing the report. I'll let you take a short breath before we get into this. But in your report, you pointed out two big themes. One was energy cooperation, the other was security. Just if you could expand on that for us and explain how strongly those two elements came through today.
Well, traditionally, Azerbaijan-EU relations have been characterized by emphasis on energy. Energy is a central component binding these two centers, Brussels and Baku. But two reasons why Baku is so important from the European perspective. Europeans have been, well, at least since February 2022, if not earlier than that, have been trying to diversify away from Russia in order to be more self-sufficient. And Azerbaijan has always been incredibly valuable. That's the reason why when last time highest-ranking EU official of this level, of the level of Antonio Costa, was in Azerbaijan, which was back in summer, I think July of 2022, when Ursula von der Leyen visited Azerbaijan, when Azerbaijan and EU signed memorandum of understanding in terms of the strategic cooperation in the field of energy. At that point, these two countries, the power centers, basically Baku and Brussels, agreed on doubling energy supplies to Europe to 20 BCM, and this is a very important figure. We have not reached that figure as yet. So basically, the clarity there is, what is very abundantly clear is that Azerbaijan is not going to replace Russian gas, Russian oil supplies, but Azerbaijan could play an important role in terms of helping Southeastern Europe in particular. Azerbaijan could actually punch above its weight in that particular sector. So, at a time when Europe wants to be more economically self-sufficient, Azerbaijan's importance has been re-emphasized. Number two factor, in the light of what is happening regarding Iran, this closure, semi-closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the importance of Azerbaijan has been re-emphasized again. Well, recently, Ursula von der Leyen, of course, mentioned about Azerbaijan, about Middle Corridor, and I made that reference to that during one of my deliveries today before the meeting. Ursula von der Leyen, in the context of connectivity, said that Azerbaijan and Armenia today are building common future on the basis of trade, connectivity, in the same way as many European countries, continental powers, were building their common European future on the basis of coal and steel alliance back then. So he compared that spirit, post-1945 spirit of Europe, to the spirit which is pervading here in the South Caucasus. Before I finalize this answer of mine, allow me to mention it's a very important visit institutionally, because Antonio Costa is the President of the European Council, effectively number one person of the European Union. Number two there is Ursula von der Leyen. And this is a first official trip by sitting President of the European Council to Azerbaijan. Nothing of this kind has happened before.
One other element that was very significant, very symbolic, was Mr. Costa expressing complete solidarity with Azerbaijan over the attacks in Nakhchivan. How significant was that, do you think? How strategic, too, in terms of the sort of way this conflict is sending ripple effects across the world?
I think that statement there was absolutely important and consequential, and that was the very beginning of his statement. When he was delivering his remarks, he started with that, he ended effectively with that particular point, inviting President Aliyev to Brussels in April. I think that effectively means the European Union collectively, as a geopolitical bloc, it is not a geopolitical bloc in the real sense of the word, but as an alliance of member countries, European Union is siding with Azerbaijan, definitely goes without saying. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev received calls from French President Emmanuel Macron. He received calls from many other major global and regional actors. Naturally, European Union. He made it very clear, but he said, I want to express my full solidarity with Azerbaijani people. He condemned in the strongest possible terms. I think that was the diplomatic term he used, in the strongest possible terms, Iranian drone attack on Azerbaijan's sovereign territory, Nakhchivan airport. It's a flagrant violation of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and international law. And clearly, at a time when Azerbaijan, together with its treaty ally Turkey, are doing their level best to actually contain threats coming from Iran, with very strong messages being sent to Iran that we fully understand your predicament. You might have made a mistake, which we doubt, by the way, but still, if it happens again, the repercussions will be there, and you will need to pay the price, which may probably be exorbitant price for Iran, bearing in mind its current situation. And also, in the light of one of the comments made by EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kors recently there, in the light of the realities established after the Washington agreement signed back in August 2025, and in view of the subsequent Turkish-Armenian normalization, which is to follow, the new reality has been established here, and perhaps EU, Turkey, Azerbaijan and Armenia should create a new coordination mechanism. I mean, Azerbaijan has no plan to join European Union at any point soon. It is not Azerbaijan's ambition. And my feeling, guys, that the more you talk about European aspiration, the less you tend to be seen as attractive from European perspective. Therefore, what Azerbaijan is presently doing, Azerbaijan is basically creating facts on the ground by means of connectivity, energy pipelines, and one day Europe may need to have Azerbaijan as part of it. You shouldn't talk about joining European Union. One day they may also send you a request that whether you are interested or not. It's not Azerbaijan's official policy to join European Union, but this is very important. I mean, what Azerbaijan is presently doing in terms of EU, its policy, Turkish-Armenian normalization, all of the things will eventually create a common space with the European Union. Yes. My feeling is that this meeting has reinforced that particular sensibility.
And also, what can I just say, 15 or 16 European countries, I think, now receiving Azerbaijani gas. I mean, that is not a small element, is it? This is a partnership that potentially could become very significant indeed.
Absolutely. I mean, the BCM figures are relatively modest, and they're very consequential when it comes to Southeastern Europe, when it comes to Western Balkans, for example, with Serbia playing a role of energy hub there. But they are really very important. Azerbaijan is not in a position to replace Russia. Had Azerbaijan exported 100 BCM to Europe, that would have been a different story. The current figures are modest, but they're consequential enough to be going on with. Yes, indeed, 16 European countries currently receive natural gas from Azerbaijan. Out of those 16, 10 are EU member countries. And recently, Germany and Austria were added to that list. So now we had before 8 EU countries, now we have 10 EU countries. And altogether, I think, if you take into account the capabilities of Southern Gas Corridor, and particularly that last part, of course, TAP, Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, we got 12.9 BCM. I think that I mentioned the figure 12.45, but actually the real figure must be around 12.9 BCM. So 12.9 BCM goes to Europe, and this is a very important figure. And altogether, Azerbaijan exports 25 BCM, which is a consequential figure. So you need to take into account Turkey, Georgia, and other European countries which are not actually members of the European Union. This figure needs to be augmented, and I think it will be augmented because what President Aliyev said that we need to double this figure. 4 years ago, when Ursula von der Leyen was here, the idea was to double the figure from 10 BCM to 20 BCM. Now, in early 2026, the figure is 12.9, so now intention is to make it 25 BCM in the fullness of time. This is very important, and also green energy is an important part of it. Black Sea cable, it comes to the equation there. Basically, and when you have energy-based relationship, you need to protect it. Protection means security. So I think increasingly Azerbaijan will become even more relevant from the perspective of EU security, energy security, and hard security as well.
And you mentioned that the Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process came up today.
Yeah.
How significant was that, and in what terms was it discussed?
Well, it was discussed as something which is happening there in a bilateral sense, which is on a bilateral footing, with the US playing an important role in the context of Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. European Union and this gentleman, Antonio Costa's predecessor, Charles Michel, was very, very intensely and intimately involved in the Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process when he was president of the European Union. So there's a question of legacy. I think the European Union sees in the success of Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process its own role as well. And that role was incredibly significant because we all remember back in October 2022 when President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan declared the Prague Declaration and for the first time in the history of these two countries recognized each other's territorial integrity. That was done through the mediation of Charles Michel. Mm-hmm. The foundations of that very agreement were laid down earlier, of course, because we remember that in September, Presidential aide Hikmet Hajiyev met with Armenia's Secretary of the National Security, Armen Grigoryan, in Washington, where they agreed on the Washington document, which was later, of course, but they agreed there and they laid the foundation for the two leaders to agree in Prague. And we all remember when Vladimir Putin, during the Valda Discussion Club, said that this so-called Washington document may not be within the best interests of Armenia because it does recognize Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. We believe that Karabakh has got its own specific characteristics, and it was in Prague on the 6th of October, and it was through Charles Michel. The reason why I explain all of these things, EU played a crucial and vital role, and Antonio Costa happens to be the successor of that gentleman, Charles Michel. This is one thing, legacy. Number two, I think Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity is about connecting Azerbaijan's two parts, but there's also Nakhchivan link, which connects Trump in Route International Peace and Prosperity, which is in Armenia, with Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan region, which is to connect with Turkey. Yes. And EU wants to invest in that, and I think that is another aspect which we should be bearing in mind going forward. What is happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia is absolutely consequential. President Aliyev himself said that. I mean, today, by the way, Prime Minister Pashinyan is in Brussels, and he was delivering his remarks in front of European parliamentarians, MEPs, where he said that we have been living in peace for the past 8 months. President Aliyev today said 7 months. Basically, they talk about the same thing. We talk about the 8th of August breakthrough, and it's a very unique feeling, of course, because I mean, I was born in late 1980s. My entire childhood and early teenage years and the youth, naturally, all of those years were dominated by confrontation with Armenia, and it's a very unique feeling that for the first time in your life, you are not enemies. You're no longer enemies with Armenia, and the same applies to Armenian people. And I think that when President Aliyev is saying that it's a very unique feeling, he actually means it.
Yeah, very, very interesting indeed. And then finally, Orkan, as you reflect on today, did you get a sense that the way in which the EU views Azerbaijan has changed, particularly over the last couple of years?
I think it has changed. I think it has changed in a very measurably palpable way. If before the end of the conflict with Armenia, we could say August 2025 is the end of the conflict, there was particular emphasis on seeing Armenia as more sort of favorable partner against Azerbaijan in a political sense. And there are still massive problems with the European Union's role in the South Caucasus, but I think that some of the negativity has been curbed, curtailed, and now relations are on positive footing. One of the problems we had before, energy, security, connectivity were not the dominating things. Quite often some other political elements were propagated and put forward by some of the EU officials. But I think that and also the confrontation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, I suppose, made some EU officials to side with Armenia against Azerbaijan in view of the fact that Azerbaijan is more powerful and you need to side with underdog. But all of these things seem to have faded away in particular after August 2025, even before that, I think. So that's a good thing because European Union has a very positive role to play in this region. the removal of the element of confrontation between Armenia and Azerbaijan allows them to focus on positivities, not negativities. And therefore, I think that, to go back to your original question, that has changed, and I'm very glad, we're all very glad that has changed.
Well, Ken, sadly, all good things must come to an end.
Yes.
We thank you for your analysis, and we'll let you go off now and finally get some rest. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll discuss the documents the UK government has now released on Peter Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to Washington amid scrutiny over his past association with Jeffrey Epstein. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note.
To Fierce.
I'm here. Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Emu.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, the UK government has released documents relating to the appointment of former ambassador to Washington, Peter Mandelson, after MPs forced their publication using the rarely used parliamentary procedure known as a humble address. Well, the papers released by the government include internal briefings, vetting assessments, and correspondence between officials discussing Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to the United States back in December 2024. According to the documents, officials had flagged potential reputational risks linked to Mandelson's past association with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein, noting that the issue could attract political and media scrutiny if the appointment became controversial. Well, to help us understand the political fallout from this story, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by Phil Churm, a UK political analyst. Phil, very good to see you. Now, Phil, as we were discussing in the break there, this is quite a test for Starmer, isn't it? Because, you know, the documents that have been released, we don't see this sort of thing very often. Keir Starmer's under a lot of pressure anyway. Politically, how serious a moment is this for the UK government?
It's a very serious situation because it is about reputation and it's about trust. And it isn't just about Peter Mandelson. I mean, he himself has been massively influential in politics, particularly in Labour Party politics, for about 30 years, he was part of the group of people that managed to be able to take Labour back into power after the Thatcher and Major years, which had already been, there for 18 years. So any controversy around him inevitably reflects incredibly heavily on the party. But the real political risk here is not just about Mandelson's reputation. In a sense, his is shattered. It's the perception that Keir Starmer's government might have exercised some poor judgment in appointing him. Now, voters, in a way, can react on this in several ways. One is they can say, oh, well, he was just a controversial figure being controversial, and that's what people do sometimes. In which case, if they do that, then the damage is quite limited. But what's more likely is that they're going to say, hang on, warnings here were ignored. And the political impact of that then becomes a much, much greater issue. And, it's in a way, it's not really a Mandelson story. It's a story about political and moral judgment on the part of the ruling party in Great Britain.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, Phil. I mean, nevertheless, Mandelson has had an impact on the party, on the Labour Party, for so long now, hasn't he? I was explaining to my daughter recently that he's someone that's been around seemingly forever. He was part of changing the Labour Party into the party that we see today. I mean, do you think there's, as more and more people are reminded, or perhaps are made aware of that for the first time, depending on their age group, do you think that really presents a long-term problem for the Labour Party?
It does if it is seen that somebody like Mandelson is part of the core of what the Labour Party is, rather than just one bad egg or one bad apple in the fruit bowl. The issue very much is about, as I said, it's about the lack of trust. It's unclear as to how this will actually emerge, but if it is seen that Mandelson in some way represents what Labour is in the 21st century, in the same way that he did at the end of the 20th century, then people will start to say, really, is that the way in which we operate? Do we hang out with people who are untrustworthy, perhaps even criminal? Is this part of the thinking of the Labour Party? Do we forgive people within the Labour Party if they're going to do this? Now, that's where the whole debate begins to come. But if people can begin to say, well, hang on, maybe the Labour Party didn't know quite what the involvement was. Perhaps they thought that the small amount of reputational risk was enough to balance what was seen as being his overall experience over the many, many years that he's done that, then, in some ways the Labour Party can survive this. But it's in a very difficult position, because if it is judging some of its most senior, some of its most important, and some of its long-standing and most influential members in a way that perhaps raises an awful lot of moral and trust issues, then it does raise a lot of questions for the Labour Party as a whole, as a parliamentary power and as a governing force.
Okay, Phil, and away from the reputation of the party, just back to the appointment process itself. I mean, I'm sure, like every other news channel, we've had teams of people wading through the recent revelations. And I think it's fair to say, if you look at them, there are some that we already knew about. There are some that do seem to be new and potentially very serious. There's one here, it says that Mandelson was a founding partner of a conservation charity that was set up by Ghislaine Maxwell and funded by Epstein. Starmer was told about this before the appointment, and many more points about Mandelson being a reputational risk, having close ties to Jeffrey Epstein. To what extent do you think this can be blamed on bureaucrats, security services, perhaps senior officials, and it was all just part of a process that went wrong, versus actually the judgment of the Prime Minister?
The vetting process for senior posts, such as the UK's ambassador to the United States, is a complex and very, very detailed process. It involves extensive checks on security, due diligence, reputational risks, and it ultimately has to have the whole issue of ministerial sign-off. So, either those things weren't happening, either those things didn't do properly, in which case those are very big questions to be asked, or some of the information which might have been important was ignored. Now, we know that people who have that sort of influence, have the sort of job that Peter Mandelson should have been doing, will spend time mixing with powerful figures, sometimes controversial figures, both in the UK and abroad and all over the world. So in some ways we can see that. But if if the powers that be, the secret services, if the intelligence services had turned around and actually warned, hang on, there may be some problems here with this particular individual, but those had been ignored in his appointment, then it does raise some huge problems for the government and the way in which it makes its most important decisions.
It was one of the things that I found interesting, Phil, was we almost hear the rhetoric from government as though this sort of shadiness is just an unavoidable, an essential byproduct of being a talented operator in world affairs. And I think many people look at it and think, is it really an essential, unavoidable element, or are there people that can be talented, well-connected, effective, but without the sort of shady elements?
The vetting process will ideally flag up any risks, but it's ultimately ministers who decide on whether the benefits outweigh those risks. And any high-profile figure, any major important government figure, somewhere if you look at the people they might have spoken to about some of their conduct, you might find some bits and pieces there that could potentially be blown up by the tabloids. But the question is whether warnings were taken seriously, and when it seems, and the seriousness of those warnings, and that's really where it comes down. So I think at some particular point, when the dust settles a little bit and people have gone through some of these hundreds of pages with a fine-tooth comb, we'll end up having some sort of idea as to whether the warnings were big enough and serious enough to have been taken more seriously, and whether they were simply ignored.
Phil, I just want to look at this issue of the relationship between government and Parliament, because I think it's quite interesting that MPs had to force the revelation of these files. Now, governments both on the left and on the right have been warned before by speakers over the years for not respecting the institution of Parliament enough. What do you think about that in this case?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, what it suggests is the lack of trust, or a feeling of the lack of trust. Because, normally governments, if you want them to publish documents, they will publish them voluntarily, even if a controversy arises surrounding that. The humble address, the use of the humble address, usually means that not just opposition parties, but in this case, some of the government backbenchers believed that there was a possibility that some information was being withheld. So what it tells us in that relationship between sort of government and Parliament as a whole is that the issue had already become politically contentious before even these documents had arisen. I suppose the idea of a humble address is usually a symptom of political mistrust rather than perhaps the cause of it.
And Phil, in terms of what you think might happen next, the extent to which this might grow into something that becomes a real serious threat to Keir Starmer's position, is it really all about this, or is it also about the elections which are looming on the horizon?
That is a big question, and I think that Keir Starmer is going into this already with some poll ratings that are quite low, a lot lower than he would want. He's already lost a very crucial by-election in the north of England only a couple of weeks ago. So what happens next really depends an awful lot on what else emerges from the documents and of course the ongoing investigations in relation to that. If the documents, if these papers begin to just show that concerns were noted but judged, manageable, we can manage those risks because it's not really going to be so much of a problem, then the whole situation might fade away relatively quickly. I think that's probably quite unlikely, because what's more likely to happen, I think, is that they may show warnings, clear warnings, quite obvious warnings were ignored, or even that there might be contradictions on the government's account of what went on. Now, if that happens, it could politically run for quite some time. And by some time, that's a problem because we go into local elections, which can't normally topple the government, but they can certainly topple the reputation of the government quite quickly. We'll go into those in a couple of months, and people will react to that. People will be taking a vote on some of these issues by that particular point. So politics, I suppose you could call it a paper trail. Politics tend to follow a paper trail here, and these documents are the start of that paper trail rather than, if you like, the end of it. It's I think there's a long way to go. It's more likely it's not the end of the story, should we say. It's sort of the beginning of more scrutiny.
Beginning of more scrutiny. Phil, always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Stay with us.
The global defense industry plays a vital role in ensuring national security. In Turkey, companies in this sector strengthen domestic production and enhance military independence.
ISA-based radar, Murat radar. This is fully digital radar. This is new for world. Aselsan today, Turkish technology leader and global technology provider.
Gökdeniz atışı hazır. 3, 2, 1, ateş. Hedef imha edildi.
I'm Nuray Mustafa. This is One on One.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching PrimeTime. Now, a press conference was held in Baku ahead of the 13th Global Baku Forum, which will take place from the 12th to the 14th of March under the patronage of President Ilham Aliyev. Organisers outline the forum's themes and programme, and our correspondent reports now.
Baku is hosting the 13th Baku Forum, organized by the Nizami Gencevi International Center. World leaders, former heads of state, senior officials, and experts from across the globe have gathered here to discuss some of today's most pressing challenges. From 12th to 14th March, panels will focus on global security, multilateral cooperation, climate policy, artificial intelligence, and regional connectivity. Discussions will also explore Eurasian trade routes, global climate diplomacy, and urban development ahead of this year's World Urban Forum. Azerbaijan plays a key role in these talks. Its strategic location and commitment to dialogue make it a hub for solutions, cooperation, and mutual understanding. Over the next 3 days, delegates will exchange ideas and explore ways for countries to work together to promote peace, stability, and prosperity in a turbulent world. The forum's opening ceremony will take place at Gülistan Palace with a special address from President Ilham Aliyev.
Plans to expand a key international highway connecting Georgia with Armenia and Azerbaijan have stalled after the Roads Department cancelled 2 major tenders. A News correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports.
The Georgian Roads Department has cancelled international tenders for the construction of the Rustavi-Red Bridge and Algety-Sadakhlo road section. The tenders, announced in August 2024, covered both construction works and project supervision services. According to the agency, the procurement process was cancelled due to low competition among bidders. The project was designed as a major infrastructure upgrade. Plans included building a 61-kilometer 4-lane concrete expressway with lighting systems, along with 26 bridges and 11 interchanges. Construction had been expected to begin in 2025 and continue in stages over about 30 months. The road sections are part of international transport routes connecting Georgia to the borders of Azerbaijan and Armenia. They also link to the region's main transit corridors, the East-West Corridor and the North-South Corridor. The project was jointly financed by the Georgian government and the European Investment Bank, which allocated a €250 million loan. Low competition in major infrastructure tenders can signal several challenges. Large construction companies may hesitate to bid if project costs are uncertain, if technical requirements are complex, or if market conditions make large investments a little risky. In some cases, governments cancel tenders to adjust conditions and relaunch the process later. Analysts say that the situation also reflects broader issues in Georgia's transport network. Political analyst David Zizishvili, speaking to A News, says that the country still struggles with infrastructure gaps that slow regional trade. According to him, cargo heading toward Armenia often faces traffic delays and damaged road sections that slow vehicles and increase transport costs. He also points to stalled strategic projects such as the Anaklia deep sea port, which has yet to secure its final investor. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
China is set to fund the construction of new border facilities in Tajikistan along the Afghan frontier. Now, the project, worth more than $50 million, is aimed at strengthening the country's border forces. A News correspondent reports now from Almaty.
Beijing will finance the construction of 9 border facilities in Tajikistan in areas bordering Afghanistan. The project is valued at more than $50 million, with the funding provided by China as a grant. According to available information, the total area of the future facilities will exceed 17,000 square meters. However, the exact districts where they will be built, as well as the type of facilities, have not yet been disclosed. The project is aimed at strengthening the material and technical capabilities of Tajikistan's border troops. Tajikistan, for its part, has agreed to exempt the project from taxes, customs duties, and other mandatory payments. A member of Tajikistan's parliament, Bakriddin Zioi, says the initiative continues earlier cooperation between the two countries. According to Tajikistan's State Committee for National Security, during the first phase of the project about 9 years ago, 12 border facilities were already built in areas bordering Afghanistan with Chinese financing. At the same time, reports about new Chinese-funded facilities in Badakhshan have previously sparked discussions about China's possible military presence in Central Asia. The issue was raised in Tajikistan's parliament in October 2021 when it was reported that a new facility could be built in the Gorno-Badakhshan autonomous region under an agreement between Tajikistan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and China's Ministry of Public Security. Later, Tajik authorities said reports about the Chinese military base in the country were not true. The debate re-emerged in 2024 after the British newspaper The Telegraph reported that China was allegedly secretly building a military base in Tajikistan amid security concerns related to the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan. However, Tajikistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs once again rejected these claims. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Children are paying the price as tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan escalate. Aid groups say tens of thousands have been displaced in eastern Afghanistan as border violence intensifies. A News' correspondent Tamim Bahis reports.
Around 68,000 children have been displaced from their homes in eastern Afghanistan as fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan enters its 14th consecutive day. According to the aid agency Save the Children's latest report, the escalating clashes have severely disrupted daily life for families in the region, forcing many to flee their homes in search of safety. The impact on education has also been significant. Schools have suspended classes, leaving more than 8,000 children currently out of school. According to the UN, since 26 February, at least 56 people have been killed and more than 120 others injured, with most of the victims reported to be women and children. The latest escalation began after Pakistan carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, saying the strikes were aimed at militant sanctuaries along the border. However, Afghan authorities say civilians were hit and have condemned the strikes as a violation of the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity, warning that retaliation would follow. Since then, both sides say they have inflicted heavy casualties on each other, although those claims have not been independently verified. Aid groups are now warning that as the fighting continues, children remain among the most vulnerable, facing displacement, disrupted education, and growing humanitarian needs. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, that is all for tonight's Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.